Hi everyone, welcome back after winter break. Unfortunately, we're in lockdown again. This little PowerPoint video is to go along with the e-learning that the Higher Human Biologists have been doing at home. It's Unit 2, CfE blood glucose levels and obesity. It's not going to go into great detail because obviously with all the other activities from e-learning you'll have picked up quite a lot of the knowledge, but it's just going to summarise the key points. I'm not going to go through all the success criteria. Please pause this for you to read exactly what you need to achieve from this key area. But the gist of it is about how we control the level of blood glucose in our bodies, in the human body, and what happens if this control system is disrupted or if it's not working properly. Here are the SQA notes. Again, give it a little pause. This is what comes up in the course support notes for Higher Human. It's basically outlining what you need to know, and the job that we do in school is try and go into slightly more detail so that you can fully understand these points. So when we talk about high blood glucose levels, you'll often hear us talking about a chronic elevation of blood glucose levels. And all this means is sorry, that's my dog shaking. And all this means is a high concentration of glucose in the blood that's sustained over a long period of time. So we're not talking about how you've just scrammed a bag of Haribo and your blood glucose levels are sky high, because a normal body will bring that back down to normal. This is what happens when we have too much sugar in the blood and it lasts a while. If you look at the diagram just down in the bottom corner there, the little white specks indicate glucose, and you can see in the first picture there's a certain amount, in the second picture you can see there's quite a lot more. Now, what can happen is if there's too much glucose in your blood, it can actually damage the blood vessels. And this is because the endothelium cells take in more glucose than normal. Now my second picture here is of an artery and a vein, and it's literally just to remind you of where the endothelium is. So the endothelium is this inner layer here, in our artery, and the endothelium is just the inner layer there. Now my pointer's going to go a bit crazy. Oh, well, didn't manage it. But you see where it was. That's where the endothelium is. So issues arise because these cells take in more glucose than normal. Now, main cause of the damage to the blood vessels is atherosclerosis, which from the last key area, you will know leads to many different cardiovascular diseases, stuff like stroke, angina, cardiac arrests. The reason that high glucose levels will increase the chance of atherosclerosis is because the high concentration of glucose increase the rate that the fatty deposits develop in the endothelium, the atheromas. So remember, underneath the endothelium there's a build-up of cholesterol, calcium, fatty deposits that form the atheroma, and that can later on lead to your blood clots and things. So the increase in glucose concentration through whatever reason, you don't need to know why, but what you do need to know is that it increases the rate of fatty deposits that form under the endothelium. So there are two main categories of vascular disease, and it all depends on where in the body the blood vessels that are damaged are located. We've got macrovascular disease, so macro is big, so this refers to large blood vessels, so those around the heart and the brain, maybe the lungs as well. So macrovascular diseases can be heart attacks and stroke. We've also got microvascular diseases, which we've not really talked about in previous key areas, and this is really talking about damage to smaller blood vessels. So it could be around the eye, so you get damage to the retina, or maybe the kidneys, this image down here, which leads to renal failure, and also something called peripheral nerve dysfunction. Now, peripheral nerve dysfunction is just about the nerves that are on the periphery, so not your main nerves, not in the main bit of your body, it's the ones that go all to the outsides and stuff. Any damage to those sorts of areas. Now what happens, going back to our microvascular diseases, is when we've got elevated glucose levels in the smaller blood vessels, you can actually get a hemorrhage. And what a hemorrhage is when blood escapes from a ruptured blood vessel. So if you remember from previous key areas, you've got your atheroma. If there's a rupture and the clotting fibres all form, you can then get your blood clot. But if that ruptures, again, you're going to release a lot more blood. You're going to get hemorrhage there. And there can be quite serious things depending on where that is. So our first picture here, you've got hemorrhage in the eye, and sometimes you'll see it to a much lesser degree, like a little speck, and that's just a burst blood vessel. But when we've got a lot of burst blood vessels or quite a big one, it can have a really bad impact with a lot of blood there. We've also got renal failure, damage to the kidneys. So what we can see in this diagram is don't know my left and my right. There we go. The kidney on the left has got damage up the top. That again will probably be some burst blood vessels or some swelling there. And so that kidney is not going to function as well as the other one. And then this little diagram here, just from what I was talking about earlier, is showing you where the peripheral nerves are. So it's not the main ones of the central nervous system. So damage to those obviously will impact lots of different parts of the body. Now that was just the first part of key area 8, which was all about elevated blood glucose levels damaging blood vessels. The second part of key area 8, no, there's 4 parts. The second part is about control of blood glucose levels. Now here we've got our SQA notes. Again, pause it if you want. I'll just expand on these a little bit further. Right. You need to bring some National 5 knowledge with you here. For this topic, you need to be confident in a few things. If anything that I say you've never heard of or you're not too sure, go back, maybe BBC Bitesize, Scholar, go back, look at the National 5 section. It's Key Area 2 of Unit 2 at National 5. Okay. Now, you should be confident that homeostasis refers to maintaining a stable environment, so keeping things constant with, be it that temperature, we're at 37 degrees, or maybe the level of sugar in your blood. We also looked at different organs in maintaining blood glucose levels. So the pancreas detects changes in the level of glucose in the blood and releases hormones like insulin and glucagon. You need to know what these hormones do. Okay? Insulin is released when there's too much glucose in the blood. And what happens is it's a hormone that triggers the cells to take in glucose. And it also triggers the conversion of glucose to glycogen in the liver. Remember, glycogen is a storage carbohydrate. Now, glucagon is the other hormone involved in controlling the level of glucose in your blood. And this is released when glucose levels are too low. And it triggers the liver to convert that glycogen, that glucose storage, the glycogen, back to glucose to release it back into the bloodstream. As a little summary here, hopefully you'll be all fine with this. It's just basically a visualization of what I've just said. You get your pancreas. If there's too much sugar in the blood, insulin's produced. And the pancreas has detected that change and then produces the insulin. The insulin will then cause the glucose to go to glycogen and our blood glucose levels will fall. That's happening in the liver. And now, if we're falling with our blood glucose levels, when those blood glucose levels get too low, that's detected by the pancreas. The pancreas will then produce glucagon. And that glucagon will go and convert the glycogen in the liver to glucose to release it back into blood, bringing the blood level back up to normal. Now, this negative feedback system is always in play. It's either producing insulin or producing glucagon to level out our blood sugar levels. So we're just going to take that NAT5 knowledge a little bit further in Higher Human, and we're going to talk about the receptors in the pancreas. So there's special receptors in the pancreas that just detect the presence of glucose. So they can sense how much glucose is traveling through the pancreas along the bloodstream. Now, there's a little diagram there that shows you where the pancreas is. It's just beneath the liver. I actually have a feeling that that pancreas in that diagram is either a little bit too big or the liver is a little bit too small. I can't decide which one, but that's giving you the rough location there. Now, these receptors, if they detect rise in blood glucose levels, they will respond to that by increasing the secretion of insulin. And of course, if they detect a lowered level of blood glucose levels, they will increase the secretion of glucagon, both from the pancreas. So we're just going to use a little example to try and help you visualize this. So imagine you've just had a meal. The level of glucose in your bloodstream will increase rapidly as your body begins to digest it. Now, this increase in blood glucose is detected by the receptors in the pancreas, and as a response, they will produce or secrete more insulin and less glucagon. This insulin will do two things. It's going to make the liver take up glucose and store it as glycogen for use later, but it's also going to cause the body cells to take in glucose for use in respiration to help get the energy from there so the body can actually use it. As a result, our glucose levels will fall and we'll go back to normal. Now, imagine you haven't eaten anything for a while, so that means your glucose levels will fall below the 90 milligrams per 100 mils. So receptors in the pancreas, of course, will detect that change, and in response to that, they're now going to produce less insulin and more glucagon. This will cause the liver to convert glycogen to glucose, and then the glucose will be released into the bloodstream. And this will mean that their glucose levels will rise. Now, the importance of this is it's all about metabolic activity and providing the cells with the correct level of glucose that they need for the metabolic pathways to continue. So when we release the glucose back into the bloodstream, it means the body cells now have access to that glucose to take in for respiration. Now, a hormone that we didn't talk about in National 5 that we now will talk about is adrenaline, and this is an important hormone in regards to response to stress. It's released during exercise and in any situations where your body doesn't know whether it's going to fight or flight, anything that's a little bit stressful. Now, adrenaline is released by the adrenal glands, and you can just see in this diagram here that the adrenal glands are just above the kidneys. Now, what happens is that adrenaline stimulates glucagon secretion and inhibits insulin secretion. So by stimulating glucagon, it's basically trying to get more glucose into the bloodstream, meaning that the cells will have access to more glucose for respiration and therefore other metabolic activities. This will allow different parts of the body to respond really quickly to whatever stress or perceived danger the body is in. So we increase adrenaline, we increase glucagon, we decrease insulin, and this therefore increases the level of glucose in the blood. More glucose in the blood, it means your cells can do more metabolic reactions, meaning you can respond to situations. We're just going to take you through the steps of how that adrenaline is released. So, pituitary gland senses stress, is triggered by stress, and then releases a specific hormone. I call it a specific hormone because you do not need to know the name of the hormone. If you're interested, you can squint and look in the diagram to the name of that hormone, but you don't need to know the name of it. So, you're stressed out, pituitary gland is triggered by stress, releases the specific hormone. This hormone travels in the blood to the adrenal gland, and the receptors on the adrenal gland detect a change in the level of that hormone. As a result, adrenaline is released. It will enter the bloodstream and travel in the bloodstream to various parts of the body. Now, we are only concerned with the relationship between adrenaline and glucose levels, so we're only going to talk about how it's going to travel to the pancreas, where glucagon is then released, and then liver converts our glycogen to glucose. Glucose is released into the bloodstream, so we're increasing the concentration of glucose in the blood. So that's what we need to know about how we control the level of glucose in our blood. Now we're going to look at what happens when this control system doesn't work very well, or at all in some cases. So we're going to look at type 1 and type 2 diabetes. As before, here are the SQA notes. Feel free to pause, make a note of them, have a little look through them. I'm going to go into greater detail just now. Now there's two types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. This course only really focuses on type 2 diabetes because that's the one that's linked to lifestyle choices and diet. Type 1 diabetes, the onset of that is generally much early on in life, and that is when there's issues in actually producing insulin. So there's issues in producing a functioning hormone to help remove the blood glucose from the blood. Now, type 2 diabetes is the one that will develop later in life, and it's linked to being overweight. So you've got increased chance of getting type 2 diabetes if you're overweight or have a poor diet. Now, type 2 diabetics, they can still produce insulin, and they do. Their insulin is not the problem. What is their problem is the receptors and the response to that insulin. So the cells are less sensitive to it. Now there's two reasons here. Now if you look at this diagram, the one on the bottom left, you can see a healthy liver, and then you can see the fatty liver. Now the fatty liver is covered with fat, and that fat can actually block the insulin receptors. So if the insulin doesn't bind to the receptors, the cells will not remove the glucose from the bloodstream. Another reason that the insulin might not be working very well, or the cells aren't responding to the insulin, is more because of what happens after the binding of the receptor. So the insulin binds the receptor and a series of reactions should occur, but what they often find in type 2 diabetics is there's a problem with those series of reactions. Your cells aren't responding to the insulin properly, meaning that we're not converting our glucose to glycogen, or we're not taking the glucose into the body cells. Now there's a series of tests that are carried out to diagnose diabetes. First is a urine test. Now this doesn't diagnose diabetes as such, but what it does do is it tells you whether there's a problem with how your body is regulating glucose in your blood. Now, the kidneys are organs of your body, and they're responsible for filtering the blood, removing waste, and controlling the body's fluid balance. Okay. Now, what you see in this diagram here is the arrow pointing to the red vessels. That's unfiltered blood going in, and then the kidney basically will filter out the blood, take out anything that shouldn't be there, and then send it out on its way so it's nice and clean. Now, in both types of diabetes, the blood glucose concentrations will be high in the urine, okay? So, because the body's not removing the glucose from the blood, by the time it gets to the kidneys, there's still a lot of glucose in there. Now, the kidneys will then remove that glucose, and it will basically exit the body through urine. So it will remove the glucose, add it to urine to try and get out of the body, because the body doesn't want a lot of glucose in it. If there's too much glucose, then that can have really bad effects on your body. So what can happen is your GP, if they suspect that you might be diabetic or have any issues, they will do the urine test, and all it is you give a urine sample, and you can see that in the bottom right picture, and they basically test it to see how much glucose is in it with a little dipstick. So basically that in this little dipstick thing here, they've got a little tab at the bottom which has got an indicator, a specific chemical indicator. Pop it in your urine, and then after a while take it out, and then it'll be able to tell you how much glucose is present in your urine. There really shouldn't be much. As I said, this does not confirm diabetes, but if there is glucose present in the urine, then further tests will be done. So the most common test to determine whether an individual's got diabetes or not is the glucose tolerance test. And this basically measures how tolerant your body is to changes in glucose. How well can it regulate itself? So what happens is the individual getting tested will fast for about 8 to 12 hours, meaning that they don't take in any food and normally no water. And then what they'll take after the 8 to 12 hours, they will drink a glucose solution. So they'll drink something that's really sugary. So basically, we're putting in a lot of glucose into the body really fast. Then, over a period of 2 hours, 2 to 4 hours, they will, the doctors will measure how much glucose is appearing in the blood. Now, obviously, if somebody's got a normal functioning body, the level of glucose will reduce quite quickly because your body will detect changes, your pancreas receptors will detect the high level of glucose, so will release insulin, the insulin will move the glucose, bringing your blood back to normal. Obviously, this is not going to happen if your blood glucose regulation system isn't working properly, like in diabetics. So I've got a graph here. Now, usually, even at the start, before you've even had the glucose drink, diabetics will normally have a higher blood glucose level than non-diabetics. Now, what I want you to do is when you look at this graph here, I want you to start from 0. I'm going to get a little pencil. Start from 0 and then basically read along it, okay? What you can see, we'll look at the normal person first of all. So at time point 0, they've not been eating anything for hours, and now they've had a glucose solution. So you can see that the glucose solution in the glucose concentration in blood increases, and then it begins to fall quite quickly, and then gradually continues to lower back down. But what happens in the diabetic person is that the glucose increases in the blood just like it does the normal person, but then continues to increase and doesn't come down until the very end, and you can see it starting to dip there. And that's where the problem is. It's having too much glucose in the blood. And now that will give you a firm, this person is diabetic or this person is not, because it indicates that the problem is with the body handling the glucose. So that was about type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Now the last bit of this key area is about obesity. Again, here's the SQA notes. Feel free to pause it, have a little read through, maybe take some notes if you want, doesn't really matter. Right, so we're basically going to look at what is obesity and then look at something called your BMI and maybe a few calculations. So obesity is a huge risk for cardiovascular diseases and type 2 diabetes. And what obesity is basically too much body fat in relation to your muscle. So it's excess body fat in relation to lean tissue such as muscle. Now, if we look down at the little infograph down at the bottom left, you'll see that 29% of people are obese, 36% are overweight, and 35% are a healthy weight. Okay? Obviously, the rest will probably be underweight or morbidly obese. Now, this photo here, which is pretty cool, you've got a normal person on the right and an obese person on the left. And what I want you to look at is, yeah, you can notice that around the edges of the body here, there's lots of fat and stuff. But what I really want you to look at is the internal organs. Look at the color difference between the normal person and the obese person. There's a lot of fat on those internal organs. Now, as soon as you start covering things in fat, they're not going to work properly. Okay? So we've got massive impairment on health if you've got a problem with obesity. Oh yeah, there's a little note to indicate for you to look at the fat around the organs. Now, for us to monitor obesity in an individual or a population, we use something called BMI, the Body Mass Index. I'm sure you will have heard of this before. You might have done it yourself. Feel free to try and work this out yourself. What I will say, and this course doesn't go into it too much, but what I will say is BMI isn't always the most accurate way to measure how much fat is in a person's body. And we'll go back to that and I'll explain why later. So basically, what it does is it takes your body mass, so you pop on the scales, get your kilograms, and then see the relationship of how much you weigh to your height. Okay. So we've got our little equation here. So what you do is your BMI equals your kilograms divided by your height squared. So you're going to square your height first of all in meters, square that, and then you will take your body mass and divide it by that. Now, if you get a BMI greater than 30, it's an indication of obesity. It's slightly different for males and females, but generally that's what we're talking about here. We've got our little diagram there. So we've got our normal would be 8.5 to 24.9, overweight 25 to 29.9, then obese is 30 plus. And also there's obviously issues with being underweight as well, so they categorize underweight too. Now, the reason that this is not always accurate and we can wrongly classify people as obese is because muscle weighs more than fat. So if you're really, really muscly, you're going to have a high body weight in comparison to your height, which means you're going to get given a greater BMI. So for athletes and stuff, sometimes this isn't the best way to measure it. You can actually do a caliper test where they actually pinch different bits of your body to see how much fat is there, and that's a more accurate way of doing it. But we're obviously just looking at BMI just now. Now, we're going to look at how diet and exercise influences obesity and can impact your BMI. So we know this. Obesity is linked to high-fat diets and also people that have a decrease in physical activity. So we've got your picture there of all the junk food, and then you've also got that guy lying down on his iPad. I'm not saying lying down your iPad's bad, but if you spend your whole time in a sort of sedentary position, not really moving much, that's when issues will arise. So the problem is when the energy intake of your diet is greater than what you're expending. That's when you're going to increase fat content, so you'll increase your chances of being obese. So to combat that, your diet should limit fats and free sugars. Now, if you're not too sure what free sugars are basically sugars that are just added to things, or they're sugars that are not inside cells. Okay, so obviously when you're eating plants and eating meat, you're eating the cells of another organism. If that sugar is not inside the cells, those are free sugars. And the problem with that is that free sugars require no metabolic energy to digest. So for your body to break down and use them requires no energy. So all they're doing there is just adding energy into your body. And of course, excess energy is stored as fat. Oh yeah, there we go. So free sugar is any sugar, blah, blah, because they're not inside the cells of the food we eat. Yep, perfect. So that was diet, but exercise is also important because if you increase how much exercise you're doing, you're going to increase your energy expenditure, meaning you're going to try and deplete or stop the energy being stored as fat. But another important thing that you're going to do is you're going to preserve your lean tissue. So you're going to preserve that muscle. And remember, obesity is a ratio between how much muscle, how much lean tissue there is, and how much fat there is in the body. Now, exercise has lots of benefits. It can reduce lots of risk factors for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, you're keeping your weight under control, minimizing stress, so really good for mental health, other hormones associated with mental health there, and reducing your blood pressure. Okay, and if you remember from previous key areas why blood pressure is so important. And this important bit down here, improving the blood lipid profiles. Now think back to when we looked at cholesterol. If we look at this lipid profile here, exercise will help you maintain the right ratio of HDL cholesterol to LDL cholesterol. Remember, HDL is the good stuff and LDL is the bad stuff. What you do not want is you do not want to have more LDL than HDL, and that's what's happening in our borderline and our high risk. What you're really looking for is a similar amount of each. Now, sometimes you will be asked to do calculations. And now, what we've got here is a few questions. The reason I've left it to the end is because some of you will be absolutely fine with this, so you don't need me to talk you through it. Others might want me to talk through some of it. So, if you did this in the e-learning and you're spot on, don't mind, totally understand, just skip through this or just leave us now. However, if you weren't too sure, then what I'd like to do is we'll do this together. So here we've got the information I gave in a previous slide, that BMI is your body mass divided by your height. So kilograms divided by meters squared, so it's your height squared. Little reminder that if you're greater than 30, then you're obese, basically. So here we've got five technically, but 4 different questions all about BMI. I want you to take a moment just to pause it and try and work them out, okay? I'm then going to go over each one and show you the working. Right, question 1. Caddy weighs 57 kilograms and is 1.64 meters tall. What is her BMI? Right, BMI, body mass, that's going to be your 57 divided by 1.64 squared. Now, if you're using your scientific calculator and you are confident with brackets and things, what you'd plug in is you'd plug in 57 divided by open bracket 1.64 squared close bracket. If you're not confident with that at all, you need to do this in 2 steps. First you find out what the height squared is. So first you'll find out what 1.64 squared is. Then you'll take that number and you'll do the weight divided by that number. So that's how I would plug it into my scientific calculator, although if you notice, we've actually got an error of where the squared is. That should be inside the bracket. And what you should have got was 21.19. That's her BMI. Is she obese? No, she's not, because it's less than 30. Right, Tim weighs 86 kilograms and is 1.7 meters tall. Does his BMI place him in the obese category? Right, work out the BMI, same scenario, 86 divided by 1.76. Again, this here, maybe I'm wrong, I'm going to have to go back and check this, but I would have thought that should be on the inside. And you get a BMI of 27.76. It is less than 30, so he's not obese. These are some of the 1-mark quick questions you might get about BMI. Now we're going to go to slightly harder ones where you get given the BMI and you have to work backwards. Okay, so Josh has a BMI of 27. He is 1.89 meters tall. What is his weight? Now, you know the equation is BMI equals body mass divided by height squared. Okay, so what you do is first you plug in what you know. Right, I know it's 27 BMI, so 27 equals x, or question mark, divided by 1.89 squares. Do a little bit of rearrangement of your equation and you'll get x equals 27 multiplied by 1.89 squared, which gives us 96.45 kilograms. So that's his weight. So now we're going to try a trickier one, which actually got 2 questions in it. It's about Trina. Trina's got a BMI of 32 and she's 1.7 meters tall. She reduces her weight through diet and exercise to 70 kilograms. Good for Trina. Right, what is her new BMI? Although you've got 3 numbers there, think carefully. New BMI, all I need is body mass and height. So her new one's 70 and her height is 1.57. So we don't need this 32. We just ignore that one just now. And plug that into our equation. So 70 divided by 1.57 squared equals 28.4. Okay, that's her new BMI. So that's nice because look, she's gone from obese over 30 to not obese anymore. So good for Trina. Right, B, what is the percentage change in Trina's weight? Okay, so there's a couple things we have to do here because we only have her new weight. We need to work out what her old weight was. Right, so what we'll do, we're going to take her original BMI of 32 and use that along with her height in the BMI equation to figure out how much she originally weighed. Okay, so original weight here, we do 32 times 1.57 squared because we rearranged our equation. So that will give us a mass of 78.87 kilograms. Okay, so now we've got her old mass and her new mass. The new mass is the 70 kilograms. So she's lost 8 kilograms. Well, nearly 9. Pretty good. Right, so now we need to do a percentage change. Now up here, I've given you the equation, which is the change, the difference between the two numbers divided by the original times 100. So we're going to find the difference between 70 and 78.87 and then divide it by the original. So divide it by 78.87. That's what we'll be working out there. And then, of course, you times it by 100. Now, again, if you're good with your brackets and your scientific calculator, sure, do it all in a oneer. But if you're not good, find the difference first, press equals, then divide by 78.87, press equals, and then times by 100. And you will get 11%. Now, this has asked for a percentage change. So you need to say it's a decrease. And to say that, you either put your little negative in front of your 11 or you say 11% decrease. If the question said, what is the percentage decrease, you could just get away with writing 11%. But in this instance, you must indicate that it is going down. So you must put your negative in. So that was key area 8, just a wee summary. By this point, you should be pretty confident with it because you've already done all the other learning materials and learning tasks that we set you for the e-learning. If you're still confused or still need a little bit of extra help, just ask me or your other teacher on Teams and we'll get back to you. And if you are watching this from another school, then just maybe ask a wee question in the comments section and I'll try and get back to you. Anyway, that's for this week, so I will see you again next week. Bye!